Okay, so we're just picking up where we left off. So we're on Act 4, Scene 1. So you will notice that this is when Macbeth's going to start talking about his plan to Lennox. Now Lennox comes in to say that Macduff has fled to England. So Macbeth has found out that that Macduff has gone, and if you remember who went to England at the start, so some of you actually answered my question incorrectly if you're in my class. I asked you why Donald Bainham and Malcolm left. So these are Duncan's sons. Now they leave because they don't believe that the servants killed their father, and they don't know who to trust. So that's why they leave. They don't know it was Macbeth. But Macduff has now figured out that there's something wrong with Macbeth, that what Macbeth has done has been incorrect. So he's gone to England, which is where Malcolm ran away to. Now, Malcolm is Duncan's eldest son, which means Malcolm is the rightful king. So Malcolm is the person that that should have inherited the throne rather than Macbeth. But obviously he ran away. Now, we know what Macbeth is like, so actually that was quite wise of Malcolm. So we want to write all this down, remember, make all these notes. That was quite wise of Malcolm, because actually running away probably really, really helped him, because the whole point is that Macbeth's always ready to kill people. So Macbeth then talks about what he's going to do. So he says that, the very firstlings of my heart shall be the firstlings of my hand, meaning I'm no longer going to think through my actions. Now, again, this is where we write down, this is how Macbeth's overconfidence is getting in the way now. So Macbeth's overconfidence is causing him to act very rashly, and we need to write that down. And he says, the castle of Macduff I will surprise, seize upon Fife. So he's going to send people to Macduff's castle, and he actually says his wife, his babes, and all unfortunate souls that trace him in his line. So he is ordering the death of innocents, and that's what we need to write down here, that all these people are innocent, especially women and children. So we're going to link that to context, and this is what you're going to make a note of. In the context, women are considered very vulnerable and children are considered very vulnerable because they're the weakest members of society. But Macbeth is happy to hurt them, which therefore means that actually Macbeth is quite a despicable, horrible person. And so then we go on to scene 2, which is in Macduff's castle. Now, if you haven't read this, I need you to go through and you need to read this. Okay? Now, Ross comes in to talk to Lady Macduff about where her husband's gone. But if you notice, Lady Macduff is actually quite a wise person. So in this part of the play, she actually says quite a few things that actually kind of reflect what society is like when Macbeth is king. So, you've got, he had none. So, you must have patience, madam, as in your husband's gone. He had none, but my husband had no patience. His flight was madness. When our actions do not, our fears do make us traitors. Now have a look over here. It says, even when we have done nothing, we are still traitors for running away in fear. So even though I know he's not a bad person, he shouldn't have run away. You know not whether it was wisdom or his fear. Okay, now this is really important here. So he's saying maybe he was smart to run away. But Lady Macduff points out a few things. So she points out wisdom, to leave his wife, to leave his babes, his mansion and his titles in a place from whence himself does fly. So he's run away from Scotland, but he's left us here. So if it's too dangerous for him to stay, then why has he left us? So in a way, we can actually see where Macduff is quite flawed, and he has left his wife, and she is quite worried about this. He loves us not, he wants the natural touch. For the poor wren, the most diminutive of birds, will fight her young ones in her nest against the owl. So even small birds protect their family, so it's not very brave of Macduff to leave us, is what she's saying here. So this is where she's sort of it symbolizes, and I want you to make sure you've written this down again, so start writing, start noting this down. This symbolizes or shows a contrast between Lady Macduff and Lady Macbeth. Because here Lady Macduff is talking about how she wants her husband to come back and actually protect her. So Lady Macduff is really reliant on her husband. She needs him, and she talks about being like a bird in the nest. And remember, like, the birds in the nest are young birds, and because they are young birds, then it means that they are vulnerable. And she sort of talks about herself as though she's a bird in the nest and she needs her husband to protect her. So Ross then starts talking. My dearest coz, I pray you school yourself, but for your husband, he is noble, wise, judicious, and best knows the fits of the season. So Ross is trying to comfort her. So in a lot of these ways, we're seeing noble, wise, judicious. Those three adjectives, write it down. Those three adjectives do show that Macduff is a good person. So Macduff is different to Macbeth. However, he still leaves. So he's a flawed hero. That's what Macduff is. He's a flawed hero. Then Ross goes on to talk about cruel are the times when we are traitors and do not know ourselves. So basically he's saying it's quite we live in difficult times now when we are considered traitors even though we haven't done anything. And when we hold rumour from what we fear, yet know not what we fear, but float upon a wild and violent sea. Now that metaphor of floating upon a wild and violent sea, I want you to write that down. That could symbolise Macbeth's reign. So wild and violent seas are really unpredictable. So write all this down. The metaphor shows unpredictability. If Macbeth is unpredictable, it could symbolise Macbeth's unpredictable reign, because you don't know what he's going to do next. Now, yes, he was okay to kill Banquo, but now all of a sudden he's okay to kill women and children. You know, it's even worse here, isn't it? Each way home, I'll take my leave of you. So I'm going to go now, but blessing upon you. Now, she then starts talking about her son having a father but actually being fatherless. Now, once again, we see a contrast between Lady Macduff and Lady Macbeth. She needs her husband. Lady Macduff needs her husband. She needs the father of her children. She relies on him, which is very different to Lady Macbeth, who doesn't actually really care about Macbeth and often emasculates him. So we want to write that down too. So Ross leaves, and Lady Macduff then starts talking to her son. And she worries about what his life would be like without a father. Now, again, showing that contrast because she relies on her husband. And then her son sort of provides quite a comedic moment. Sorry, I keep moving the camera around. So her son provides this quite funny moment here as he's talking. And he says, and Lady Macbeth actually says, you know, your father's as good as dead because he's left us, he's gone. And the son says, well, what will you do for a husband? So he's quite funny here, like, you know, you're saying I need a father, but you need a husband. And she says, I can buy me 20 at any market, as a bit of a joke. And, you know, he sort of says, oh, you know, if you get a man, you'll only sell him again. Now, the son then asks, was my father a traitor, mother? And this is where it gets really important. So technically he was a traitor because he did go against the king. The son says, what is a traitor? And Lady Macduff says, why, one that swears and lies. And be all traitors that do so. Everyone that does so is a traitor and must be hanged. So all of these people are traitors if you swear and lie. Now, he then asks, who's going to hang all the swearers and liars? And she says, the honest men. Now, look at the next page. Then the liars and swearers are fall because there are liars and swearers enough to beat the honest men and hang them up. Now, I want you to have a look at the writer's intention here. yes, he's being quite funny. Shakespeare's being quite funny here, but he's also pointing out that most people are liars, that you can't always trust people. And it does really show here that a lot of people are quite corrupt. So again, it's a way for Shakespeare to show the corruption. And Lady Macduff again says, now God help thee, poor monkey, but how wilt thou do for a father? So again, we're seeing that contrast. She really relies on her husband. If he were dead, you'd weep for him. If you would not, it were a good sign that I should quickly have a new father. So again, the son is just making quite a comedic situation. Now, the reason that Shakespeare uses comedy in this part of the play is because what happens next is very shocking. And at the time, you know, the killing of women and children, as it is now, was incredibly shocking. And it was incredibly shocking that the king would do that. Okay, so even if he is a bad king and Shakespeare's trying to portray him as a bad king, it's still a really shocking action. So the reason that he uses comedy here is to sort of break up the tension a bit, okay? Because what's about to happen next is going to be very, very, very shocking. Because the messenger comes in and talks about the danger approaching. And he talks about, you know, people are coming. And I need to leave now, but you need to be careful. So Lady Macduff says, where should I fly? I have done no harm. Where am I going to go? I didn't do anything. But I remember now I am in this earthly world where to do harm is often laudable, to do good sometimes accounted dangerous folly. Why then, alas, do I put up that womanly defence to say I have done no harm? This is a really interesting piece of text, and you need to annotate this. You need to make sure you're annotating this along with this video. She says, in this world, to do harm is often the more rewarding, but to do good is accounted as dangerous foolishness. So basically she's saying sometimes in this world, it's easier to be a harmful person than it is to be a good person. Now that really symbolises Macbeth. Where has he gotten? So he was the bad one out of him and Banquo, but he's gone further at this point in time. So Lady Macduff's really pointing out how the kingdom of Scotland has been really corrupted because of Macbeth's reign. And the murderers come in. Now, the murderers ask immediately where her husband is. And Lady Macduff, even though she was angry at her husband, look at how again she contrasts Lady Macbeth. Write this down. She contrasts Lady Macbeth because she actually says, she actually doesn't give away her husband. She doesn't betray her husband. She's a good wife until the end, even though she felt betrayed by him. She says, I hope he's in no place so unsanctified, where such as thou mayst find him. So she's saying, actually, I hope you never find my husband. I hope he's in a good place. I hope he's in a better place than this. And the murderer says, you know, he's a traitor, thou liest, you shag-haired villain. Basically calling him, like, you know, scruffy. And then he calls him an egg as well, meaning like a youngster. But he's happy to kill him, which is, again, really shocking, that sort of bit of speech. It's really shocking. When you say egg, it's almost like something that's not developed. But he's still happy to kill him. Now, he kills his son, and he kills Macduff's son, and the son tells his mother to run away. So we see Lady Macduff killed off stage. Well, we know Lady Macduff is killed off stage. Now, what's really important about this scene is it really shows the extent to which Macbeth will go to keep hold of his reign. To kill the most vulnerable people in society. And this is really the turning point for Macbeth. And a turning point means where everything's sort of, where everything's going to go wrong. Because remember, he needs to beware Macduff. He hasn't killed Macduff. If anything, he's made Macduff angrier. So what we need to think of here is that at this point in the play, this really shows how brutal and horrendous Macbeth has become. And it really drives home Shakespeare's message that power can corrupt people. So rather than being the brave soldier fighting for his country that he was at the beginning, he now becomes this horrendous traitor who is killing people. And not just killing people, but killing the most vulnerable people that he can kill. And that's what we're really seeing in this scene, and that's why this scene is really, really important. Now, I will move on to Macduff and Malcolm, just briefly to talk about what happens. So we need to remember that Malcolm and Macduff are not actually aware of what's just happened. And we then find out why Macduff has gone to England. So Malcolm says, "Let us seek out some desolate shade, and there weep our sad bosoms empty." Meaning, Macduff, we're all grieving over Scotland, and, this is quite a difficult time. And Macduff says, "Let us rather hold fast the mortal sword, and like good men bestride our downfall and birthdom." So, actually what he says is that our downfall, birthdom, means it means the country. So where you're born is your birthdom, kind of like your kingdom. And he actually talks about the fact that their kingdom, where they were born, is going through a downfall, meaning that the reason he's fled is because he recognises that Macbeth is a bad king. Now, what I want you to write down about this is that it shows that Macduff is fiercely patriotic. So actually, even though he's left his wife and children, we're starting to think of him as a hero in some ways, because he has done all of this for the love of his country, and that's perhaps more important in some ways to a lot of people. Each new morn, new widows howl, new orphans cry, new sorrows strike heaven on the face. Now, this is quite interesting because it's almost like dramatic irony here, because remember when he talks about new widows howl, new orphans cry, and his wife and his children have just been killed. So again, he's showing the suffering of a lot of vulnerable people. So widows are vulnerable, and they're suffering because their husbands have been killed in Scotland by Macbeth. Orphans, so children, are vulnerable people, and they're crying because their parents have been killed in Scotland by Macbeth. So actually what we're noticing here is that Macbeth is taking advantage of and exploiting everyone who's vulnerable, and killing them and harming them so that he can stay king. And what's the dramatic irony comes in, where this makes this moment quite tragic, because Macduff is trying to save all these people, but he'll never be able to save his own family. So actually, as a reader, we feel more sympathy for Macduff. I want you to write that down almost exactly as I've said it, so you need to pause the video. New sorrows strike heaven on the face. Now, that's personification of heaven as having a face. Now, a slap in the face is an insult, okay? So that's what we need to write down. This is what this metaphor means. That Macbeth being king is almost an insult to God himself. Because remember, the divine right of kings, Macbeth's not meant to be king. And yet it resounds as if it felt with Scotland and yelled out like a syllable of dolour. Now, So we find out, yes, Macduff is flawed for leaving his family, but he's done it all because he's a patriotic person trying to save people. So this is where we really see Macduff as that tragic hero. He's a really, really tragic hero here, because we do feel quite a lot of we feel quite a lot of sympathy for him for that. And then we'll look at the scene between Macduff and Malcolm next.